For years, I have been using media. Todd, Genesis Science Network, right? That's one of the ways we got connected to begin with. Genesis Science Network, other forms of television ministry to try to reach the world with the truth of God's creation and therefore point back to the creator. You can't have creation without a creator. You can't have design without a designer, can you? So for the next few moments, I want to walk with you through what I call the language of evolution. This is a tale of bait and switch. Have y'all heard of bait and switch tactics? Where you go in to get something and then they say, oh yeah, we got it for you, and then they hand you something completely different. Well, the same thing is happening in high schools and in colleges every single day. I think there are about 500 million high schoolers out there that every day they're going to school, and in biology class, they are learning that they are animals, the result of random chance. And they're told that they're nothing special, just the result of evolution. But it's a tale of bait and switch, and I'm about to break it down in the next few moments very, very simply because these are some complex topics. The ones I've thrown up on the screen, you could get PhDs in most of these different studies, right? But when you hear speciation or mutations or natural selection or adaptation or survival of the fittest or spontaneous generation, and you're like, well, how in the world do I combat that when someone comes up to me and they ask me about evolution? You see, skeptics use semantics to make Christians look foolish. They take little technicalities and they use words to try to tell you that, oh, you're just one of those Bible believers. You're one of those Christians, right? I bet you don't even believe in evolution. So let's learn to define our terms, and we're going to be better equipped to witness and converse with those around us, whether it's a coworker, whether it's a friend who's really kind of on the fence, or whether it's a child or a grandchild who's questioning everything, whether it's a fellow student at a university who says he's an atheist, whatever it is. We're going to get better equipped over the next few moments. Atheistic biology professors know the game of bait and switch all too well. Some of them realize what they're doing. Some of them are just parroting what their professors taught them, which is what their professors taught them, which is what their professors taught them. And they don't realize it, but some are purposely misleading people because they know that what they're teaching is not based on fact. It is not even based on good theory, but it is based on fiction. So, I'm going to ask you a question. I want to poll the audience. Do you believe in evolution? No. What if I told you that's absolutely the wrong answer to give to this question? And I don't mean the right answer is yes. Let's try it again. If I ask you, do you believe in evolution, the correct response is not no. The correct response is, what do you mean by evolution? All right? Because this is where they get you. These atheists and agnostics have a particular set of words that they use to try to trick you and to make you look foolish, right? So, do you believe in evolution? What do you mean by evolution? We're going to go over that in a few moments, okay? Because a lot of people say, well, David, we see a lot of change happening, and evolution is defined as change, right? I mean, things change, so therefore, evolution is change. If you mean change, then yes, I believe in evolution, right? The weather changes every day right here, I'll tell you that. So yes, I believe in evolution. What do you mean by evolution? So let's break it down. If you're taking notes, this is probably one of my most scientific talks, but I'm going to completely break it down in basically 6 different points, bullet points, that if you're taking notes, you can write those down. And then when people ask you questions or when you need to witness to someone and try to tell them that there is a creator, and that creator is the God of the Bible and ultimately Jesus Christ, then you can stand firm on what you're saying. So let's tackle these hot button topics that many people call evolution in the course of a few moments. Let's start with speciation. Look at all of the finches on the screen. These are a type of a bird. They're called a finch. They're all the same bird, but they have variations in color, beak size, eye shape, all sorts of little things like that. Everything you see on the screen is a finch. So Charles Darwin proposed that species could vary over time. He was right. It's basically called adaptation. Charles Darwin took a trip on the Galapagos, on the HMS Beagle to the Galapagos Islands, where he saw a lot of these different types of birds. And he said, well, yes, these birds are adapting to whatever island they land on. If the island has a lot of trees, well, then the birds, many times the birds that are the most successful are the ones that have the thinner beaks because they can get in the trees, right, to get the insects out of the trees. Whereas the birds over here seem to be camouflaged better, right? So it's adaptation. Charles Darwin was right about that. But he went on to take a monumental leap by saying that because we see tiny variations in, say, the beak shapes of finches, well, then every creature must be related to each other. And that's what we call universal common descent. Everything in the universe descended from a common ancestor, from a single-celled organism, from an amoeba, whatever that is. Okay, and that is where he had no idea what he was talking about. Universal common descent, as proposed by Charles Darwin, starts with an amoeba. And if you'll notice on his sketches, in his diagrams from his book that he started sketching when he went to the Galapagos, he started to draw this tree. You see, it looks like a tree. At the bottom is a single-celled organism. That's number one. And then, as that single-celled organism grows, well, it eventually says, well, I need to become a fish, and then I need to become a bird, and then I need to become an ape, and I need to become a man. And that's what all those little branches are. That was Charles Darwin's theory. That was, a while ago, okay? But there's two words at the top of his page. Can anyone read those for me? I think. He said, I think. Well, the great philosopher Gene Kelly once stated, wishing don't make it so, right? You can't just think something without proving it. You can't just wish it and make it happen. You have to go out and document it. Well, guess what? That's never been documented, ever. And we've had plenty of time to do it. So speciation, there's a lot of minor change, a lot of speciation that takes place. That's God-given adaptability to your environment. But then there's a lot of variation between animal kinds and plant kinds. Everything you now see on the screen, right? The blade of grass, the pine cone, the rose, the butterfly, the human, the bird, everything you see on the screen, that's a lot of diversity. And it just so happens that every system of life uses a common code. It's called deoxyribonucleic acid. We know it as DNA, right? Okay, that means there are only two possibilities here. If everything's using the exact same instruction book, the exact same code of life, it means that either everything evolved from one organism in the past, which we've never observed, and it evolved using that exact same mechanism, and nothing in supposed billions of years of evolution has ever deviated from using DNA. How likely is that? That something, a blade of grass, wouldn't have decided, well, hey, I'm going to evolve using a different characteristic. Very unlikely. So that's one option. The other option is there was a common designer. God said, hey, let me write the instruction book for all life. And then based on the way I form the words, the ACTGs of the DNA, basically I can create a bird from that, I can create a rose from that, I can create you from that. Which one is more likely? A common designer. So yeah, we see a ton of variation within all of biological life, but what we don't see is change from one type of a creature into an entirely different type of a creature. And the excuse given by evolutionary theorists is, well, it would take millions of years to see that kind of change. But what I'm telling you is we don't see a Canarysaurus rex. And if that was perched in my tree, I would be very concerned, so I'm glad we don't see that. We don't see anything like a Great Dane, do we? And I have never spotted a kangarooster hopping across my yard. In other words, we don't see change from one type of a creature to another. Lots of variation, no change from one to another. Now, again, the excuse given by the secularist is, oh, well, David, that's actually possible. Just give it enough time. In a few million years, you might turn into a kangaroo. Who knows? But at that point, is it science or does it take a lot of faith? It takes a lot of faith, doesn't it, to believe that something's just going to happen given enough time. It's like a fairy tale. So here's what I'm telling you. Speciation, that number one out of the 6 different words we're going to study, speciation is real, observable, repeatable, demonstrable, empirical. It's good science. Things can change. It is not evolution. It will never produce amoeba to astronaut. It will never turn one creature into another. It will not happen. Speciation is real, but it's not evolution. So now, if someone says, you're one of those Christians, you probably don't even believe in evolution, do you? And you say, what do you say? What do you mean by evolution? And they're going to say, well, they're going to stumble now because they just expected you to say no. They're going to say, like speciation. You just don't even trust in species. Wait a second. No, speciation is real. Animals can adapt in these tiny little ways, but they never turn from one creature to another. If speciation is what you mean by evolution, then yes, I believe in evolution. Now, all of a sudden, you've got them on the defensive. So that's where you turn to the next one. The next hot button topic is adaptation. Adaptation is many times called evolution. Is that true? Well, if you define evolution as adaptation, it's extremely simplistic. We see a lot of change, but it's not the change required by Darwin. A type of change called adaptation is observable. If you take a dog, let's say that she's got short hair, he's got short hair, you breed him with a dog that has long hair, well, their puppies could turn out to be long hair, short hair puppies, all sorts of things. In other words, the genetic code is built inside of those different creatures to be able to have long hair, short hair. 2 dogs, one with long hair, one with short hair, you don't get a hippopotamus. But you can get small variations like the length of hair or coloration, okay? So then if you take only the short-haired puppies from that litter and you start breeding those together, well then pretty soon you're going to weed out all of the long hair information and you're only going to be getting short-haired dogs. Now, if I had to draw this in a chart, it would look something like this, with complexity being on the left-hand side and time being at the bottom of the screen. So in other words, the more time that passes, the complexity of the animal gets less and less. In other words, it can't have long hair and short hair anymore. It's all short hair. But the variation gets more. In other words, you can have long hairs and short hairs and all of that. But the more time that passes, things are going downhill. Is that what we need for Darwinian evolution? No, we need all of these good things to be taking place, new animals to be created, and that's not what we see. And a lot of this is happening at the phenotype level, which is where it gets really complicated, but what I'm telling you is that a lot of the change that we see in animals isn't even happening in the DNA. It's epigenetics. It's on top of our genes. So in other words, it's not changes within the DNA code. It simply switches inside each and every one of us and all animals that are switching on and off to tell the DNA how it's read. It's incredible. It's like an engineer thought to develop switches in all mankind and all animal life and all plant life so that we could adapt. It's amazing. Who would the engineer be? Let me give you one more example. Adaptation. Cave fish, okay? So there are fish, and those fish go inside of a cave. Now, it's dark inside of the cave, shallow pools of water, okay? And let's break down what a cave fish is. Fish go into a cave, and they lose their sight over several generations because they don't need to see to be able to exist in that cave. The cave is so dark, eyeballs wouldn't do them any good. There's a common word that I'm using here. Fish go into a cave and they lose their scales because they have none of the natural predators to try to eat them, so they don't need those scaly mechanisms for defense. Fish go into a cave and they lose the function of their swim bladder. That's what allows them to go up and down through in the ocean or in extremely deep rivers, right? Because they're in a shallow cave pool. Fish go into a cave and they lose their pigmentation because their pigmentation, their color, is not useful in a dark cave, is it? But there's a common factor that I just used about 4 times. What was it? Lose. They haven't gained anything. They haven't turned from one type of a creature into another. They have simply switched off that information. And there is a lot of evidence to suggest, actually, it's been observed scientifically, that within 1 generation, they can start to regrow that pigment. Within 1 generation, you see more eyeball activity happening when they're reintroduced in a normal environment. In other words, they didn't even truly lose it. God developed a mechanism for them to be able to switch off things they don't need until they needed it. And once you put them back in a regular situation, they switch back on their coloration, they switch back on this, they switch back on that. That is an amazing designer. That's not something that evolution can accomplish. So here's what I'm telling you. That second word, if you're writing it down, it's adaptation. And adaptation is real, it's observable, it's repeatable, it's demonstrable. It is not evolution. Could never be used to produce molecules to man evolution. Evolutionary biology requires a lot of faith. So, what about mutations? Because that's a huge one. Now, this is kind of a fun one because you've seen this one in the movies, right? You've read about it in comic books. Somebody gets exposed to radiation, they turn big and green, right? Or they get bitten by a spider, they start climbing the walls. Okay, that sounds really great, and that would be good for evolution were it true. The thing is, it's just in movies and comic books. There are such a thing as mutations. There are smaller mutations, things like a 2-headed snake or a 3-legged cow or other things like that. However, they're typically not beneficial. For instance, that thing right there, that 2-headed snake, is it going to fit in the exact same spots that a regular snake would be able to fit? No, it's going to get stuck. So is it better? Is it a beneficial mutation? No. Is a 3-legged cow going to be able to walk as good as a 4-legged cow? No. So mutations are typically not beneficial, to which the skeptic will come up to me and they'll say, David, you are just talking about those really ugly, big mutations, the things that make things absolutely unusable. What about tiny little changes, mutations within our genetic code that eventually keep adding up until finally we've turned into something different altogether? Let's look at Berkeley's top example of a beneficial mutation. Let's just take a look. Is that okay with y'all? Berkeley universities, in their Understanding Evolution section of their textbooks, their top example for a beneficial mutation. This is going to be good. Sickle cell anemia. A beneficial mutation. The only thing they can think of, because sickle cell anemia in malaria-stricken environments can increase your risk of your chances of survival. But it is also a very deadly condition that will shorten your lifespan overall. In other words, the best thing that Berkeley can come up for with a beneficial mutation is a potentially deadly condition that can semi-help you survive longer in a very specific malaria-stricken environment. Maybe it's time we admit there really is no such thing as a beneficial mutation. We need something positive for evolution to work. I'm saying, what if a fish suddenly sprouts legs and it can walk right up on the land and leave? That would be the example of a positive mutation. Or would it? Because as soon as it walks on the land, what's going to happen? It's going to die, isn't it? It can't breathe. Yeah, so it has to evolve the lungs at the exact same time. It has to evolve the skeletal system to allow it to actually walk on land as opposed to the buoyancy of water. It has to evolve all of these mechanisms all at the same time in order for even fully functioning legs to be of any benefit to the creature. Again, mutations are typically harmful, not beneficial. And yet, in most college textbooks, what you'll see is something like what you see on the screen. It's a beautiful bell curve, a Gaussian curve. And they'll say, well, you see the red area? Those are bad mutations. And the green area, those are good mutations. And the good mutations stay. The bad mutations are weeded out because the animal dies. And that's the way it works. So everything just gets better and better and better and better and then turns into something different. And it's explained like that. Did you know that this is actually what mutational curves look like right here? The red is the harmful mutation, and I can, let me see if I can highlight that. Well, it flashed for a second. The red at the bottom edge of the chart, this one right here, well, that is extremely negative mutations. That's probably going to kill the creature. And then if you take a microscope, you can see this tiny little area of green. Boom, right there. That's supposedly the beneficial mutations, but here's the problem. Those supposedly beneficial mutations all fall within what's called the no selection zone, which means that it actually doesn't help the creature in its lifetime. So therefore, it has no knowledge to try to reproduce offspring based on that mutation. In other words, it's not going to last. So anything that might be supposedly beneficial won't last but a generation or two before it's weeded out itself. So when we observe a simple shift in the DNA code, it's messed up. It's messed up God's original plan. It's mutated a perfect DNA design. And yet we all have hundreds and thousands of mutations inside of us right now. I have over 100 mutations more than my parents did, and they 100 more than their parents, and so on and so on. So over the course of humankind, what I'm telling you is we are running downhill fast. That means that if we have been standing around here for several 100,000 years, then we would all be dead. Mutations would have completely overrun human society, and we would all be dead. If we stick around here for a few thousand more years, humankind will not exist. That's kind of actually encouraging, isn't it? That means that the Lord has to do something pretty quickly because we're going downhill fast, and that is the truth of life. That's what sin brought into the world. That's the curse of sin that we brought into the world. All things are going downhill, but mutations are real. They're observable, they're repeatable, they're demonstrable, they're empirical. That means that they're good science. That's that third word. But they're not evolution. They'll never produce evolution. So when someone says, you're one of those Christians, you probably don't even believe in evolution. You say, well, how do you define evolution? Well, I mean speciation. Oh, you mean species? If you mean speciation, then yeah, I guess I believe in evolution because speciation is real. It's observable. Well, what I really meant was adaptation. Oh, you mean adaptation? Well, that's real. That's observable too. That's scientific. So if that's what you call evolution, I suppose I believe in evolution. Well, no. What I really meant was mutations. Oh, mutations is what you call evolution? Well, mutations are real. We see mutations every day in the lab and in real life. That's where a lot of diseases come from. So if mutations is what you call evolution, then I believe in evolution. But if what you're trying to tell me is that one animal is going to turn into another animal just given enough time, Darwinian evolution, then what I'm telling you is that is not just pseudoscience, that is science fiction. So now let's go to the fourth hot button topic. And the fourth word out of the 6 is natural selection. Oh, this is a big one because I call natural selection the God of evolution. Given enough time, Mother Nature will just select. What have you just done? You've elevated nature to the position of a God, haven't you? Okay, so when someone tells you that they're an atheist and that they believe in evolution, what you can tell them is that no, actually, you have your own religion with a pantheon of gods of your own. The pantheon of gods of your own are the gods of time, the gods of natural selection, the gods of spontaneous generation. In other words, you have faith in something you've never seen, you've never observed, can't be scientifically proven, and yet you have so much confidence in your faith that you preach it to everybody you meet. That's a religion. And that is what so many people are caught up in. And if we know how to combat that, then we can help them and we can cause them to think about what they're saying. So natural selection is a god. It's the god of evolution. The false god of evolution, it's supposedly the driving force of evolution. It's in the title of Charles Darwin's work, On the Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection or the Preservation of Favored Races. That's right, Charles Darwin was a racist. Natural selection, supposedly the way evolution works. Let's look at natural selection. Natural selection coupled with mutations. Harvard and BBC call antibiotic-resistant bacteria an example of natural selection. All right, let's look at Harvard and BBC. Let's just say that scientists develop an antibiotic that it looks for a bacteria with 4 eyes. Now, of course, bacteria don't actually have eyes. This is a theoretical, right? I'm trying to explain it in a cartoon form, but let's just say that the antibiotic is going around and it's looking for bacteria that look like that with 4 eyes. Well, the antibiotic is going to kill all of those bacteria. What about this one? Well, this one is like a 3-eyed bacteria. It has 4 eyes, but one of those eyes is droopy, right? So the antibiotic can't see one of those eyes, and it says, oh, that's a 3-eyed bacteria, and it moves on to the next thing, so it doesn't kill it. Well, then what that means is that this bacteria is going to thrive. This bacteria has a mutation which is going to allow it to thrive in your body, and the antibiotic won't kill that particular bacteria. But is this bacteria as healthy? No, not at all. If you put this bacteria back in any situation that is normal, well, then it's going to be dead because it is not nearly as robust as standard bacteria. So in other words, no increase of information has taken place. Nothing is good has happened. That's the opposite of what we need for evolution. So there's a process that some have called natural selection that is observable, repeatable, demonstrable, empirical. That's our takeaway on this point, is that nature doesn't have a mind, okay? We can't say that nature is going to select anything. It doesn't have an intelligence. But what many people have called natural selection is not proof of evolution. It is actually a process that is God-instilled, and it means that certain organisms are going to thrive as opposed to other organisms. Natural selection cannot answer Darwinian evolution. Therefore, we need to write that one down as having some evidence, but it is not capable of producing molecules to man evolution. Which brings us to survival of the fittest. Survival of the fittest. Ooh, this one is what we've heard Darwin. This is all Darwin wants to talk about, survival of the fittest. And it's related to natural selection. Basically, the sick impala will get eaten by the lion. The healthy impala runs and gets away. The sick impala is dead. The healthy impala continues to produce more healthy impalas, and therefore, the impala species, the impala population remains healthy. Is that evolution? It remains healthy. It doesn't turn into a super impala. It just stays healthy. That's what survival of the fittest is about, and it will not produce evolution. Evolution requires the rewriting of massive amounts of genetic information, and you can't get from an amoeba to an astronaut with writing in all of the instructions for a nervous system, a brain, a skeletal system, lungs. Everything about us is so fearfully and wonderfully made, as King David put it, is so created in the image of God, is the way Moses put it in the book of Genesis. Everything about us is so incredibly designed, there's no way to get that from any type of chance. Let me put it this way. Survival of the fittest is like this. There's a hypothetical situation where brown and white rabbits make their way to the Arctic Circle. Now, the brown and white rabbits contain genetic information to produce many different colors of rabbits. You can get brown, white, gray, black, all sorts of different colorations. What color is going to do the best in the Arctic Circle? The white, because there's a lot of snow. That means that this one is going to be the lunch for some fox, okay? So, which means that this one is still running all around, and white rabbits breeding with white rabbits produce a lot of white rabbits. And so all of a sudden, you've got those rabbits thriving in that environment, and the brown rabbits thriving in the wooded environments, and the gray rabbits thriving in the other. Do you understand? We haven't done anything to evolution. All we've done is weeded out a particular population just in one area. That's not evolution. They're devolving. They're getting less sophisticated. They're switching off genes, not gaining new information. Using survival of the fittest as proof of evolution takes a lot of faith. It is pseudoscience. Evolutionary biology requires a lot of faith. So here's what I'm telling you. You can write down if you're taking notes. Survival of the fittest is real, observable, demonstrable, repeatable, empirical. Empirical means that it's good science, but it is not evolution. It will never produce Darwinian evolution. That's our takeaway. Now, before we get to the sixth one on the list, I'm going to tell you about a couple of different things that we've got going on. When I was 18 years old, I formed a nonprofit. I began speaking in churches on science and the Bible. When I was 16, I started taking photos of space. Many of you have seen some of my photos a couple of years ago. Photos of space, astrophotography, and I was blown away. It reminded me that the heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament showeth his handiwork, that day unto day utters speech, and night after night showeth knowledge, but there's no speech nor language where their voice is not heard. In other words, the heavens are shouting at us that there is a grand designer, that you're not cosmic accidents, star stuff, 14 billion years in the making, but instead you are created with purpose through Christ. So that's how it got started. We have the Creation Club magazine, and that, I'll remind you again before we go, but on that table over there, blue cards. Blue cards have pens next to them. Take the pen, fill out the blue card, set the blue card down, face down on a pile. Every other month, we send out a free print magazine called the Creation Club magazine. You can then read it, send it on to children, grandchildren, spread it around, leave it at a doctor's office, whatever you want to do to try to get the word out. But it's got free kids activities, science articles, all that sort of stuff, and it's absolutely free of charge. So make sure you take advantage of that before you go. Fill out the blue card on the table. We have the Creation Superstore, which is over 2,000 different books, videos, and resources, homeschooling resources, gifts, all sorts of things. And now we have a physical location for that as well, but it's creationsuperstore.com. We have Genesis Science Network, which has been airing 24/7 for, I think, 7 years straight now. Free of charge. It's like Discovery Channel, but for Christians. We leave out all of the evolutionary garbage. We do not try to convince people that they are somehow chance and time. And that is called Genesis Science Network. It's free on Roku. If you have a Roku, download the Genesis Science Network app. If you have Amazon Fire TV, download the Genesis Science Network app. If you have YouTube on your TV, you can actually go to the YouTube app, type in Genesis Science Network, search for it. It's live 24/7 on YouTube. And then you could go to GenesisScienceNetwork.com and watch it 24/7, free of charge. And then we have the Wonder Center and Science Museum, which I'll share a few updated pictures in just a second. But that has come a long way. I've written a couple of books. One is called Wonders Without Number, Created with Purpose or Conceived from Chaos. I don't have any of those with me. Another book called 21 Verses Backed by Science, Deepen Your Faith. It's a short read, but it's extremely powerful, and it gives you 21 scriptural verses that point you back to scientific authority in God's Word. It tells you, hey, there's no way that simple man, would have known to write these verses down, because we didn't even know that these verses had scientific things in them until thousands of years later we discovered it, right? And I do have a small stack of those, and we're a nonprofit, 100% donation-based, so you can pick one up if you'd like. Just until we run out, just pick one up. Genesis Science Network, we talked a little bit about that. And it just so happens, remember I told you I changed the time? That's so I could come here and tell you that I have one cabin left for one couple. We're completely booked out for September, but we do actually have one cabin left. So if anyone is interested in joining me on an 11-day creation photo safari In South Africa, we eat gourmet foods. We will have impala steaks, and we will have some unusual desserts. I book out an entire reserve where we have game vehicles, open-air game vehicles at our beck and call that will pull up to our lodge. After we eat, we load into these open-air game vehicles. We drive through the bushveld, and within minutes, we are seeing impalas and giraffes, and sometimes at sunrise, we catch lions with the sun shining through their manes, whole prides of lions crossing the savannas, and then we look up in the heavens, and it is so remarkable because the southern hemisphere has an entirely different set of stars, and not only that, but there's very little light pollution in this area of South Africa. So you see the Milky Way in all of its glory. So if you're interested in that, just talk to me before we leave today, and I'll get you a brochure. But we do actually have one cabin left for one couple. Other than that, we're booked out. And again, be sure to get your free Creation Club magazine. I wanted to share about the Wonder Center. The Wonder Center opened in October. Yes, it's so exciting. It is over 100,000 square feet. And in fact, y'all got a chance to see it before we were open, right? I don't know, have you been back after? Not yet. Once, okay. Over 100,000 square feet. When you walk in, you're greeted with a 55-foot-long Camarasaurus, a long-necked sauropod dinosaur stretching his neck into the second story. We have a planetarium which is top 10 in the world. Out of over 4,300 planetariums worldwide, based on size and technology, we rank in the top 10. It is like the most immersive flight through space that you can ever imagine, flying through galaxies and all of that in a 140-seat planetarium. We have 2 musical Tesla coils. These are 1 million volt electrical coils that Nikola Tesla invented in 1891. And they shoot electricity in the same room as you, but we tune the frequency of the electricity, just like you can tune the vibrations coming out of your mouth for this. We tune the frequency of electricity so that the shock waves reach your ears as musical notes. You hear electricity playing music at 1 million volts. Just a quick update of what's been going on in our ministry as well. This was the total solar eclipse. I was in Cape Girardeau. I was actually in Dallas, Texas, and I had all these people lined up. In San Antonio area, I had farms and ranches lined up. East of Dallas, I had places lined up. All the way up into Indianapolis, I had places lined up, and I was like, I'm tracking the weather. Wherever it's clear is where I'm going to be. And all these people were like, okay, well, you can come here. It's on the path of totality. This is on the path of totality. You just tell us at a moment's notice. So I flew out to Dallas, Texas, and I spoke in front of 800 people at a conference. And the day before the eclipse, I was actually with 2 NASA astronauts. One who is known to have the most time in space other than one other astronaut. I think 2 years in space. That's a long time. And the other one is General Charlie Duke, 88 years old, but at 36, he's a year older. When he was a year older than me, he had walked on the moon. Can you imagine that? And he did it not as a Christian, by the way. He said, I walked on the moon at 36, and I came back home, and I was like, now what? What else can you imagine accomplishing in an entire lifetime? He said, 36 years old, I've accomplished every man's dream, and I still don't feel filled. What am I missing? So we opened a distillery. And he made a lot of money. And he said, I've walked on the moon, and I've made buku-doodles of money. Every man's dream, and I still don't feel filled. What am I missing? And so he tried Jesus. That worked. So anyway, I was speaking with 2 astronauts, including General Duke. I spoke twice, they spoke twice, and then I flew back to Cape Girardeau. I flew back to Nashville, and then drove up to Cape Girardeau, where I captured this. You can see solar prominences. You see the little loop at the bottom corner? That's fire coming off of the sun. And then this was the totality right there. So that's the magnetic activity coming off of the sun right there. Just a few days later, y'all, this was recent. I don't know if any of you saw it, but there was a huge sunspot activity on the sun. I was on Newsmax during this time. I was on a bunch of different networks. But anyway, there's a lot of sunspot activity, and it caused a CME, a coronal mass ejection, that streamed towards Earth. And over the Wonder Center, we saw the aurora. Did y'all see the aurora? I'm telling you, and over the course of a couple of hours, I got some incredible photography of the aurora. I've seen it in Canada on a one-week speaking tour. This was remarkable. For Tennessee, and friends down south, as far as south as Florida, they said, yes, we saw it. So this was a very rare thing. And then I will play you a 30-second clip, because this is above the Wonder Center. The aurora is happening above one of the east. This would be the east wing of the Wonder Center right here. But I'll play you a 30-second clip. Let's see if it works, of the Wonder Center.
Just outside Nashville, the Wonder Center and Science Museum, with a top 10 planetarium, kids' hands-on activities, the teen favorite 1 million volt musical Tesla show. It's worlds of fun for the entire family. Experience the wonder. Explore the science. Inspire curiosity. Embark on adventure. The Wonder Center and Science Museum.
We're pretty excited about that. We've had buses pull up from, LA. We have had ladies' retreat buses pull in from North Dakota. We have had school groups, church groups, homeschool groups, Christian school groups, and we just had, praise the Lord, our first public school group. Yeah. That's what it's all about. We're a nonprofit organization. We exist on donations. We're basically a missionary organization because we run the largest science museum in Tennessee, and we advertise it as such. But secularists and children who are so confused, and believe me, we've had some confused children coming through, are stepping into a science museum, and they're learning the truth of God's creation. And ultimately, they're learning the gospel through that, because you can't have creation without a creator. And we know who that creator is. He gave us his word. He told us who he was. And then he became flesh to come down to this tiny planet to live, die, and be raised again so that we could be with him for eternity. And we're getting so many opportunities. We exist on donations and monthly support. We do have tour group rates. We've gotten a lot of tours coming through. We're connecting with a very hard-to-reach demographic who's been told, trust the science. To which I reply, yes, you can trust the science, just don't trust the scientists. Science is raw data. Science doesn't lie. Science is truth. But then scientists come along and they start interpreting it, and they misinterpret it, and then they put their agenda on it, and that's where everything gets messed up. Well, we're turning it back to truth. We're changing the narrative that has been pushed on us for several generations. So if you're interested in getting involved in any way, whether it's monthly support or you want to come out to the museum, just let me know, or you can visit wondercenter.org/give. Which brings me to the last, I think it's number 6. And if you have been making notes, you can write down the 6th point, and it is spontaneous generation. Ancient Greek philosophers believed that life could just spontaneous generate, basically pop into existence from things like mud, dead animals, moldy grain, and it actually held scientific thought for a while. Basically, people thought, they said, we're using real observational methods when we see this, because dead meat breeds flies and maggots. So the dead meat is turning into flies and maggots. No, that's not the way it works, right? But that's what they thought. Well, this is what we observe. Anytime you have a lot of grain, you have a lot of mice. So therefore, the grain must just be, boom, popping into mice every now and then, right? So again, these types of things, they thought they were using real observation, but they didn't understand what they were seeing. Finally, they said, no, that's not the case. But obviously bacterial life can still spontaneously pop into existence. So Louis Pasteur, who was a Christian, who was a Bible-believing creationist, he said, well, I can prove this one way or the other. So he started capping off flasks of boiled broths. So the boiled broth doesn't have any life in it, right? It's all been boiled out. So he caps off one flask of it, and then he leaves another flask open. The capped off flask doesn't grow any bacteria. The one that's left open all of a sudden starts growing a moldy substance on top. And he's like, well, that must have come in through the open cap. But the one that I had sealed off didn't grow anything. Therefore, life does not pop into existence on its own. Now, that's kind of obvious today, but in the 1800s, they didn't know. And he finally was able to prove it. So he proved it, and he called this law biogenesis. Life comes from life. Well, then how are we all standing here? If the universe is all random chance, it all happened when stars exploded and there was a big bang, and then that coalesced into planets, and eventually a rock turned into a human. Wait a second, we have just actually gone beyond the laws of science, right? The law of science says you can't get life from non-life. You can't turn a rock into a human. You can't turn a prehistoric soup into an amoeba. You can't get life from non-life. And therefore, we know that the only way to get life from non-life is not within the natural world. In the natural world, life only comes from life. In the supernatural world, the one true life, the one who begot all life, the one who is outside of the universe, outside of time and space, the one who is able to manipulate all of those laws, who is able to break scientific laws, to control his own nature, the one who is able to work miracles, the one who is able to do anything he wants, he spoke life into existence supernaturally. And that is the reason that we are standing here today. Yet today it's being taught, just give it enough time, it might happen. It's time we get back to the truth. It's time we push aside and shun science falsely so-called, which the Bible talks about. And it's time we get back to the truth. To believe that life just spontaneously originated takes a lot of faith. So our takeaways today are the first 5 things that I mentioned, if you wrote them down, and someone challenges you, do you believe in evolution? You say, how do you define evolution? What do you mean by evolution? They say, well, mutations. Oh, no, mutations are real, but it won't produce molecules to man. Well, I mean, speciation. Oh, speciation is real, but it will not turn a hippopotamus into a giraffe. Well, no, I mean survival of the fittest. Oh, survival of the fittest is real, but it is not going to turn an amoeba into an astronaut. Well, I mean, spontaneous generation. That's the only one that you can tell them that no, that has no basis in reality. It's not factual, and yet it's still taught in our universities and in our high school biology classes today. And that is a crying shame. It has done more to encourage the suicide rate of teens because we're teaching them they're animals, that they have no purpose. It has done more to encourage atrocious acts like school shootings because what? It's just another animal. There's just a crowd full of animals, and what's one animal killing another animal? It has done more to encourage other atrocious acts like the acts performed in Nazi Germany, like the acts performed by Joseph Stalin. And it was all going back to the idea that we are just chances of the cosmos. So you can definitively say, push it aside, that's not true. And you can definitively say that I believe in change. I believe in adaptation, speciation, survival of the fittest, all of those things. Those are real, and you see them happening every day. But I don't believe that life can come from non-life. And I don't believe, because it's never been seen, that you can turn one type of a creature into another type of a creature. You are breaking scientific laws to believe that, and therefore, I, standing on God's word that He created everything in the beginning, am the only one who is scientifically correct. You are using science fiction. And when you're able to approach it that way and to break it down like that, That's when you get those light bulb moments, and you're like, oh man, I never thought about that. And that's when your family member shows up to Thanksgiving, and they're sitting down at the table, and they're just about ready to argue with you again about this whole evolution thing or this whole Christian thing or whatever it may be. And then they throw that at you, and then they're like, well, I never thought about that before. We have to become equipped as believers to be able to defend our faith, and it can be super, super simple. It can be us saying, well, what do you mean by evolution? That's what I hope you've picked up today, and I hope that you've gotten something that you can take home and use with you in your everyday life.